So today we are talking to Danielle Ritter. Danielle is the VP of Internal Audit at GitLab. Danielle, thank you so much for taking the time to talk today.
Thanks for having me here. So excited to be here.
Absolutely. So Danielle and I both met at Instacart. I joined in July of 2021. I think you were there slightly before me.
Slightly after, I joined November of 21.
Okay, nice. Yeah, so it was a 2-year process for me, and all throughout the 2 years, everyone was aiming towards the IPO, and it was this big event that was going to happen. And I ended up leaving about a month before the IPO actually happened. So my first question was, how was the IPO party?
Oh, the IPO party was so fun. It was a unique situation in that they brought the NASDAQ to our office because there had been so many people involved in getting the company to where this IPO is actually happening. The CEO wanted to have everyone part of the celebration. So that was a really, I think, unique experience for a company to go public versus having the leadership team going out to New York to the stock exchange there.
Nice. I was really hoping you'd say it was rubbish, but I guess that works too. So I guess is any part of it during as that button is hit and you officially go public, is anything as the VP of Internal Audit thinking through, okay, now it's the timeline starting for year one SOX, or is that totally out of the consideration?
No, I mean, totally was. As that was all coming to fruition, and I obviously knew that the IPO was happening, even though it was confidential. It's like people across finance knew that they were so busy. They're like, oh gosh, you must be busy. I was like, I'm going to be busy a year from now, not right now. So knowing that you've got that first year as a public company to get through SOX, it doesn't hit until first full year of IPO. So I knew going into the IPO that now the time was coming that my team's purpose was actually coming to fruition. And now that I'm thinking about it, the CFO at the time, I remember we were having drinks after the IPO at a party, and I remember him making a speech saying, "All right, Danielle, now it's step up. It's you're on right now."
Now the real work begins. Yeah, that makes
Yeah,
total
yeah,
sense.
real work begins for sure.
One of the things I thought about a lot during my time at Instacart was I wished as an engineer that we'd had more engagement with the internal audit function earlier in the engineering process itself. So during the system design process, the two most basic things you'll go through as an engineer is functional requirements, non-functional requirements. And it's been very rare that in the non-functional requirements, someone lists out, this is how we pass the SOX audit, or this is how we increase auditability. So as tooling like Midship kind of gives auditors back more time away from manual testing, and it moves more towards the world of being an advisory partner, what are the conversations and who do you need to talk to at the company? And what does it look like to actually get that buy-in from leadership to become more of that advisory partner in the org?
Yeah, I think it needs to start from both the top down and bottoms up. I think CEO needs to be bought in that yes, we're going to make investments in building and scaling technology with controls as it's being built. And quite frankly, there's an inflection point where that doesn't make sense, right? But as you're getting closer and closer to a potential exit in an IPO where you know that criticality of that is going to come, both because of compliance obligations that come with it, or just to scale to get to that next size. Like you need repeatable, scalable processes in place to manage risk and allow you to move faster. When you kind of get to that point, getting buy-in top down is so critical because it is a trade-off that needs to be made between, where investment of resources is being put. And so CEO, CTO, CIO, if that exists. I think CFO, knowing the importance of that from a Sarbanes-Oxley public company compliance standpoint is really important to get that buy-in. And then that trickling down, kind of going bottoms up and really helping to educate the folks on the ground who are building the systems, building the processes, to hold their hand and work with them to help them understand what the risks are there, what that could potentially look like for future state controls, risk management, and working together to co-create those in a way that is efficient and useful to the organization at hand. And I think that it looks differently for different organizations depending on the culture and the technology stack and the strategy behind that.
I think in terms of how that differs from what the second line needs to do versus the third line in a company, I was at the Draftiverse conference last week and they were talking about changing teams from the team of no to the team of go. Is it very similar dynamics to what a GRC team would look to do? Or is there any kind of differences in the incentive structures between the second and third line there?
I think at an early stage company that those lines personally look very similar. I think there may be different skill sets that those two teams bring that together in a partnership can help provide the level of guidance that's needed to the engineering and really across the whole organization. I would say that also translates into the finance organization. When you've got folks in finance who have never been at a public company, that experience from a second line SOX PMO function or internal audit, together those groups can help individuals think through risks and understand like what that looks like to build something that's scalable and doesn't need to have band-aids on it when you get to a more scalable point. I don't think you need to put rocket ship level controls at a super early stage company, but working together with an internal audit function and a GRC function and the frontline function to build controls that can scale as the business and the processes grow with it is kind of the magic sauce that really is not easy to do. It also depends on the culture of the organization.
That makes total sense. Pivoting slightly into two of the terms which we hear from our customers a lot and people are very, very interested right now are full population tests and continuous monitoring. And I think from people who aren't on the ground auditors, full population tests are very easy to understand in terms of reducing the risk profile and just increasing the coverage that we can look at. From the continuous monitoring side, could you talk a little to what are the benefits for the team widely as to why continuous monitoring actually makes sense?
Continuous monitoring makes sense because you're doing it more real time. Full population, you could still do at a point in time and doesn't provide that same level of insight to real time risks that may be arising in the organization. Like the whole point of having controls in place is to manage risk. Some controls are preventative controls, some controls are detective controls. If you're performing a detective control a month, 6 months after, a transaction occurs, that risk could still exist during that period of time of which you're waiting to perform the control or do the detective control test as well. And so being able to have a continuous monitoring process allows a company to identify when those risks you're trying to mitigate arise more real time so that if that risk arises, you can address the risk more timely, if that makes sense.
Totally, yeah, totally makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, if I think about a basic example of user access, right? And making sure that people who terminate the company don't have access to your systems. If you're auditing and making sure that someone doesn't have access to your systems 3 months after they leave the company, but they actually did have access and they actually logged in, then you got to go figure out, did they do anything that's putting my processes or my company, my risk at harm? If you have that continuous monitoring going in place, if someone were to slip through the cracks and their access not be terminated, then you could catch that. And the risk exposure is so much less than that time period between when you do that audit test.
I think we hear outside of just the risk reduction piece itself, are there benefits to the team in terms of smoothing out when the testing is actually happening throughout the year? We all know there's time crunches at certain parts for teams, but does continuous monitoring actually help alleviate that?
I believe it does because you're able to spread that effort out throughout the time period. And if you're actually able to implement continuous monitoring, you've probably done that in a more automated fashion, which in itself is more efficient. But by not having these chunks of time that are needing to be audited, or maybe I should say, by not having these chunks of time where auditors are surging to do work, but at the same time, the auditee is also being pulled from their day-to-day job to answer audit questions and stuff. If you've got that ability to continuously monitor the risk that exists, that need to have that surge resource goes away, in addition to what we just talked about in regards to the risk mitigation benefit and identifying the risk sooner so you can mitigate the risk, I should say.
Yeah, I think when you think about the earlier conversation around becoming that advisory partner, do you think that it's an easy message, an easy sell to the other leadership team around those second order benefits of increasing and moving towards that world of continuous monitoring, or is there still a bridge the gap between those functions?
I honestly think there's a balance between that. Clearly, I believe that there is value in creating continuous monitoring for the reasons that we just discussed. I think setting it up does take time. And I think having tools that can create efficiencies to help set that up clearly is a benefit. And I think if we can demonstrate that value to leaders and do it in an efficient way, that it certainly is something that early stage companies or even companies that are beginning to think through how do we create more efficiencies through automation, through real-time auditing. Like that absolutely comes a value of absolutely is a value opportunity there. But I think it does take time. And so you gotta figure out when the right time to do that would be.
Yeah, yeah, totally. And it's we think about it a lot from how to articulate, I guess, beyond the first order benefits you get from Midship of increasing efficiencies. What are the wider things that happen to the team as a second order effect? And so it's something which is constantly top of mind for us. So I think when you think about more broadly the question of how to attract and retain the best talent in audit, there's a lot of talk right now about a talent shortage, not enough college graduates coming through with accounting degrees into the audit profession. What are the other things outside of just distributing that workload that are top of mind for you when you think about retaining that talent?
I think it's kind of sexy work. I mean, you think about what a first year college entry grad is being asked to do. That manual audit work is pretty mundane.
Mm.
And a lot of people do it for a couple years and it's a great skill set to build and you learn through that and you move into other opportunities, whether that's up the ranks of an audit ladder or use that experience and go into other parts of the organization. But to be able to use technology to do that for you and then actually be able to use that time to use your brain and be trained to use your brain to think through what does this really mean to the company and what are the risks to the organization, because you may have technology doing that work that otherwise was going to take you 4 hours of control to test 30 samples of something. I think that it creates an opportunity for people who have an interest in accounting, technology risk to use technology in a fun, sexy, innovative way that I think could attract new talent that otherwise they may not be interested in that type of profession.
That makes sense. And in your experience, how particular around tooling do you find auditors to be? Because engineers are like famously pedantic about this to the point where I think if Instacart had told me to code on a Windows laptop, I would have ended the relationship after the first week there. Is it same in the audit world or are people a little bit more relaxed?
I think they're a little bit more relaxed. Like auditors are a little bit more relaxed in what they use because they have to audit different systems and different
Mm.
processes. And so you kind of learn to be a little bit agile and kind of go with the flow, especially if I work at one company. And so I'm auditing one company. But I think about my experience back when I worked in Big Four. I was out at 20 clients a year looking at different processes and systems. And I was kind of forced by nature of my role to be flexible in the tools that I use. I think everyone does have their interests and their pet tools that they use, but I think that auditors are pretty flexible. But if they
Mhm.
find one that they really like, they're going to want to continue to use that and kind of influence being able to use what they're comfortable with.
I think the only really big divide between that I've seen so far is Excel versus G Sheets. And my understanding is if you're using G Sheets, you're a cool company. If not, then maybe not so. I'm not sure if you agree or not, but it's the one opinion I've seen.
Yeah, but G Sheets doesn't do everything you can do in Excel. It caps out at a certain number of records and it does not have all the functionality that Excel has. And so some cases you got to end up converting that into Excel or being able to run certain macros or plugins. And maybe it's more of a plugin technology that hasn't been built for G Sheets. But I hear what you're saying and definitely see like the more emerging younger companies that haven't been around as long using Google.
So thank you so much, Danielle, for your time. It's been great having the conversation today.
Thank you for having me. It's great to talk to you and best of luck with everything.